you doing this evening? Good. Welcome to Literotica, the 6 do's and 9 don'ts in erotic romantic writing, or whatever it was we finally decided on calling this thing when we put it through.
We only had a half dozen choices.
Oh, yeah. We here are Full Coverage Writers, an online resource repository for writing resources, entertaining and engaging materials for writers to become better at writing. My name is Will, the resident erotica writer for the group. Joining me is Charles, the main man in charge.
My title is Instigator of Literary Insanity, thank you very much.
But Charles in charge just sounds so much better. All right, tonight we're going to give you 6 do and 9 don't tips for erotic writing, particularly for if you're looking to add some erotica to your long-term novel. If you're looking just to write straight up porn erotica, these are more guidelines than actual following tips. But if you're just looking to add to your serious novel, then this is the place to be. And then all my papers get stuck.
Not my fault.
No, this is my copy.
I didn't do it.
This time.
Yeah, well.
Excuse me. All right. The first tip I have is to maintain consistency with your point of view, which is really a good tip to have when you're writing in general. You want to make sure that whatever point of view you're covering in your story pretty much stays consistent so you don't confuse your readers. This is particularly important in a sex scene because you might be tempted to change your point of view a lot depending on how many people are involved in your sex scene. But basically, once you find your voice for your story, you want to try and hang on to it. All right, this is my first time leading a panel, so if I seem a little nervous. Thank you. If you're going for a narrative point of view, kind of like a top-down, omnipresent narrator, then you're pretty much free rein to change point of view within reason. I use the same rules for speaking, wherein if you're changing your point of view in someone's head or from someone's perspective, start a new paragraph. That way it's less confusing to the reader when they're reading and all of a sudden you get from your bottom's perspective to your top's perspective. Wait a minute here. But if you're going to change from one perspective or another, just a little paragraph change usually does the trick, helps keep formatting going while allowing you to change your perspective without confusing people. Another good way I found to change point of view is with a small in-chapter break. I don't know if you guys have seen that before, but typically when a scene changes to another location or there's a small time jump but it doesn't warrant a new chapter, there'll be a couple space breaks in the story to indicate the time change or location change. I found if you need to change your point of view to say maybe you're writing a scene where someone's spying on a couple people and they don't know, you might be able to jump over to that other perspective while trying to keep a separation of 2 kind of sub-scenes within a scene. I usually use what did I write down here?
Many things.
I did write many things. Okay, here's what I wrote down. Something I try to do is also keep primary focus on one character within a scene. You don't have to keep your point of view solid on that scene the entire time, but have a focal character, a kind of important main character for the scene, is usually pretty helpful for helping to maintain your point of view. Whichever character who's really supposed to be experiencing something new or who you really want your readers to relate to, try to focus more on what their reactions or interactions in the sex scene is, opposed to anyone else involved in the scene, especially if they're trying something new for the first time. Because that way you can really get across their experiences for trying something new, whether they liked it, whether they didn't like it, anything like that. That should help to maintain a point of view without breaking it too much. Feeling that? I guess not.
I'm saving up.
Oh dear.
Oh yeah, you're in trouble now.
Another important thing to keep track is to remember your characters' personalities, Personalities.
Stop talking like me.
I'm hanging around you too much. Personalities, anatomy, and general physics. Physics is forgotten a lot during erotic scenes. Yeah. All right, so if you're looking to maintain a certain level of realism within your story, you want to keep individual characters' personalities and interests in mind. You can use that to help add extra depth to your sex scene, to your scenes in general. For example, certain ones are into certain things, they're not into certain things, they may be open to trying new things, or other things are just completely off the docket. Certain positions or activities, if you want to call them that, may be off the menu, or maybe, maybe not. You want to include that possibility in your scenes to help add more depth. You don't want all your characters just to be open to everything under the sun, because nobody's open to everything. Everybody has their list of things you want to try, things you will do, and things, oh hell no. So if you have a character who's generally a shy type character and you want to maintain that they're kind of shy, kind of quiet, you want to keep that in the bedroom. You want them to be a little meek, a little slow, a little bit hesitant, maybe let the other person lead them along. And then depending on how aggressive your other character is, they may be a bit slower around a shy character, or they may try to take advantage depending on individual character personalities. And of course, anatomy is very important. I've seen and read a lot of things that forget about basic anatomy. For example, we can only bend and twist and move so far. One thing is autofellatio. Most people can't do that. If you can, good for you. Most people can't. So you want to keep that in mind. You want to keep an individual character's limits in mind to make sure they can't bend themselves into a pretzel whenever they want to.
Unless you happen to have like the contortionist.
Well, even then there are limits. And then, as I said, basic physics. Unless you're writing your scene in zero gravity, which it can happen. It can happen. I don't know what story you're planning on writing.
Space opera writer.
Exactly. But if you're down on Earth, there is gravity. It's going to pull people down. So you can't just have one person able to pick up another person and engage while holding them up in the air without some kind of extra physical strain on them. Sex can be pretty physically exhausting as it is. Holding up an entire other adult adds to that. So you may want to include that whoever is holding up the other person may be experiencing some extra strain or getting tired, or maybe you can't finish that way. Whereas the other person may be experiencing some extra pleasure thanks to gravity pulling him or her down a little bit more. Sorry, I just saw my partner's face there when I said that. He must be plotting
All I have to
something.
say is the wall is your friend.
Oh, yes. Walls can be helpful. Adding a little bit of extra support can be helpful. If you have like a strong character who works out a lot, they might be able to pick up a person. So if you've established a character is physically strong, then go for it. But if you've established that a physical character might be physically on the weaker side, maybe stay away from the feats of near inhuman strength during your sex scenes.
Yeah, we're not talking about Armstrong.
No, we are not talking about Armstrong here, and I don't want
Please
to talk
don't.
about Armstrong during a sex scene. That the man is frightening enough by himself with half of his clothes on. Keep the pants on. He's cracking up now, I'm sorry.
Stop killing my minions.
All right, the third do is to properly maintain balance with foreplay, intimacy, climax, and afterglow, which is something really we should do in real life too. But like good real sex, good written sex should include some parts of all four of those, to some degree depending on what you're shooting for. Foreplay is particularly important and probably missed the most during sex scenes, but it's a really good setup for how you want your sex scene to go. If you're looking to create a romantic, intimate feel to your sex scene, try to do a more long, drawn-out foreplay, show them sweet talking each other, a nice romantic dinner, or something that you would find romantic, whatever that is for each of you. You can better set up a smoother scene right from the start for your readers if you start out with good slow foreplay. On the other hand, if you're looking for something fast-paced, you can short it down to intense kissing, biting, other things, whatever it is, without going into too much detail. Excuse me. But if you set up a faster foreplay scene, you're getting your readers set up better for a faster, potentially raunchier sex scene within your novel. Once you've got that mood set, you can actually get down to the intimacy, which is the part we're all here for. Let's see. Try to stick with poses and positions you're more familiar with, either personally or through research, and that'll help you get across in better detail what your characters are doing. And it's okay if you have a male involved to take a little bit of time explaining that first penetration. Something that made me think of that is I read somewhere someone said that in a lot of erotica and fanfics they read, penetration is done in half a sentence. And it can be more than that, especially from the male's perspective and the woman's perspective. There's a lot of, that is basically the kickoff right there. So take time, a couple sentences to delve into that, and your intimacy scene may not be too long. You may feel after you read it, if you look at how long it is, it may feel kind of short. That's probably because typically intimacy scenes, it's a lot of repetitive motion. So basically a lot of movements, primal feelings. So unless you're having a lot of changes of positions, it may come across like just a couple paragraphs. You may feel it's kind of short, but it's probably about accurate. And once you get through that, you'll get to the climax, hopefully, depending on how your scene goes. If you set your things up right, the climax should kind of come naturally, just like setting up the climax to any scene or your novel in general. It's kind of the same thing on a smaller scale and with a lot less clothing. Excuse me, but you can, sorry. This is a good part to get into your characters' heads and try to detail the emotions they may be experiencing when they hit that final climax. They really hit that crescendo there. There's a lot of, it's not going to be a lot of talking, but a lot of raw feelings that they're feeling, feelings they maybe have to the other person or people involved, depending. So that's a good way to add more dimension to your sex scenes. And another good way to do that is if things don't go right. If maybe one person finishes before the other, it happens. Oops.
When would we ever do that to our characters?
All the time.
Because this is one more way to torture them.
Yeah.
When are we ever mean to characters?
All the time. Once you get past however you want your climax scene to go, the last step is the afterglow scene. This is probably another part that's skipped a lot, but it's a good chance to get some character or plot development set up for your sex scene. After sex, people are usually more vulnerable, a little bit more open with the person they're with, considering how intimate they just were together. It's naturally that they might be more revealing. Or you can even get more reveals about their feelings for each other. If one person declines sticking around and snuggling for the afterglow, you can set up that maybe there isn't as much depth to their relationship beyond the sex. On the other hand, you can use that for a lot of conversation, a lot of snuggling, maybe some just silly laughter, tickling, anything like that. Anything. Afterglow is silly. Sex is silly. Sex is crazy. Sex is weird. Sex is weird and it should be weird.
Not silly, you're not doing it right, right?
Yeah. And then part 4 is to know when to fade to black, which is important for any scene, but can be tricky for a sex scene. The real key is knowing when you want to end your sex scene, when you want to finish it and move on to the next scene, end your chapter, whatever that is. And the real key to figuring out when to do that is knowing what you're trying to get across plot-wise with your sex scene. Getting to know, figuring out what you want to add to your overall plot with your sex scene, making sure you've gotten that across, then you can feel safe that you're getting close to when you should fade to black. If you haven't gotten that point across yet, you're not done yet. Making sure you've finished your plot, the plot point you want to add to your overall story, whether it be plot development, character development, whatever it is you intend to add. Lost my spot there. All right, so the obvious choice is typically sometime after afterglow. Once the completed sex is done, your scene's done. Your characters have done it, they've gotten together, they've done their thing, time to move on. Typically, that's a good way to go because by then, hopefully you've completed your plot point to that point. But there are other more creative ways to go about it. If you're looking for something a little different, you can have an interruption. Something goes on, somebody barges in, knocking on the door. I don't know, aliens invade? Sound good?
Aliens invade.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to interrupt you.
I'm being interrupted.
Yes, you are.
Now is not the time to fade to black.
Yep. I love you.
I love you too. All right. So yeah, if you're going to have some kind of interruption, you may want to fade to black shortly after that. Either your characters no longer want to have sex anymore, depending on the interruption, or they want to go back to having sex, but you've gotten your plot point across. Then you don't necessarily need to go into the more erotic parts of the scene. You can just fade off there under the implication that your characters are going to get back to getting busy. This is also another way that if you've interrupted a private act, fading out before they get back to business will reinstate the idea that it is a private act because now even the reader isn't watching anymore.
But I wanna.
Well, we all want to, but it doesn't mean we always can.
Okay.
There are laws against that, remember?
What?
All right, so another thing to point is that your scene may be done and your characters may not be done. Sometimes, like I said, it's good to fade off early, and sometimes after the afterglow, people aren't done. Maybe they feel like having a round two. If you've gotten through your plot point, you don't necessarily need to write round two. If there's more plot you want to add, of course, write it in, but sometimes you may want to fade out at the point where your characters are starting to get back in. Anyway, yeah, another thing is you can choose not to have any of the sex in any of your sex scenes at all. You can always fade out before the intercourse, during the foreplay or right up to the intercourse. If you're looking to include more underage appropriate suitable implications of sex scenes, why are you here? But if you really want to, just fade out to black with just the implication that your characters are going to have sex, and as long as there's no plot that needed to be revealed that way. Yes?
When you say fade out or go black, maybe I'm a little confused. Is that like a huge comic book reader in Slinko, Nick Fury, back in the 60s, had a picture where Nick Fury's gun just hung up with a heart, and then, because you're talking to a female, the next panel was a gun and a heart, and the next day, you're like, it makes me feel like a better man.
Yeah. That is definitely the idea of a fade to black, where basically you just find some way to not write the scene, just imply it or end it, and then move on to the next day or the next scene. And that is a good example right there for a comic book version of that. That's how they would do it. They would just imply it with a little heart and a gun, and then just cut on to the next day and say, I feel like $1 million. Another important tip is researching other people's styles of writing to help you develop your own style. We all have our own style, but there's nothing wrong with taking tips and getting advice from other people. There may be other ways to write a scene or a position or an interaction that we may not think of that someone else did. If you write someone else's erotica, you might say, oh, I didn't think I could write it from this perspective, or I didn't think people could do that. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. But it's a good way to get more ideas on how to create more, to basically add more to your writing arsenal. You don't want to, of course, copy someone else's style, but it's a good way to enhance your own style. Basically, maybe borrow some ideas and then mold them to better fit your own writing voice. Of course, the trick is finding good erotica to base off of. It's not always easy to just go into the bookstore, walk into the library, walk up to someone there and say, hey, I'm looking for your porn.
What, you don't do that?
I don't do that. I'm not surprised that you do.
That would explain the looks.
Yes, the internet is the best/worst place to find your erotica. You might have to go through a lot of tripe before you get something really worthwhile, but it's worth the hunt. It definitely is. You're just going to have to do some research authors first, get a feeling for their reviews, their styles before you read their stuff. And you want to make sure the authors know what they're writing about before you try to base your writing off of theirs. Some writers may not necessarily write certain types of sex acts as appropriately as they should, and then even still get published anyway. So I will mention no authors or titles here myself. You may take what it from you will.
What I'm here for.
But some authors don't necessarily write things from the proper sense, so you want to make sure you do your research into authors and make sure that they're writing things the right way before you try to use them as an example. But researching is always a good thing to do, and just reading is always a good thing to do. Always keep reading. It'll never hurt your writing, except for taking up time.
Says you.
There's someone with a library in your bedroom.
And?
Oh, come on, like you can talk. You have a library at ours too.
True. Right, the last of the 6 do's is to keep in mind who your audience is. You always want to remember who you're writing to. If you're writing a story that's going to contain erotica, obviously you're going to be writing for an 18+ crowd, because anything under than that, you can't guarantee someone will get it. That doesn't mean they won't. We all know how it goes. But let's just assume that they won't be able to get, anyone under the age of 18 won't be able to get their hands on your novel if your novel includes gratuitous, graphic, adult romance.
So if they don't have a wristband, they can't read it.
Right. You need your wristband. So one thing you want to do is, if when you're writing your erotica, there's a good chance you're going to be writing something, at least at first, that interests you. So there's a good chance you want to cater to that audience. If there's a particular kink or fetish or pairing, anything like that that you want to write about, keep in mind that most, not all, of the people who are going to read it are going to be interested in that as well. So don't throw them off by throwing in something that's completely out of left field without some kind of warning first.
How about out of right field?
Maybe out of right field.
As long as it's not center field, you're all set.
No, we don't want to go center field. Center field's boring. So if you're trying to go for more of a lighthearted style, you're not really including any obscure or intense kinks, if it's a lot of the softcore sex or romantic sex, and then you randomly throw in hardcore bondage from out of nowhere, you might suddenly turn a few readers off halfway through your novel, which is not something you want to do because they're going to stop reading and then they won't buy the sequel. So always keep in mind anything like that. If you're specifically writing for an obscure kink, make sure it's known early on in the beginning that you're going to include whatever fetish it is, so that before readers who are more tame-minded get in, don't accidentally read something they don't want to read. turns a lot of people off, and then they might not want to read other of your stuff if you do write something more tame. Since these readers are potentially, eventually might be giving you money, you want to cater to what their wants are. Hopefully, I hope you all succeed in getting money for your writing. So if you're looking for outside opinion, let friends proofread your stories. If you have comfortable family members, let them read your stories. Yeah, if you don't, just stick to friends. You might not want family to read what you're writing, considering where we are here. It depends. It depends on how close you are to certain relatives. But get constructive criticism from your friends. See how they feel about scenes. You know, if something's too intense based on the rest of your novel, or not intense enough based off the rest of your novel. Take time to proofread yourself, edit yourself, see if make sure it all fits together and fits towards your intended audience, whoever your audience is. But not your audience.
Oh.
Which brings us to the 9 don'ts. The first one I think is the most important one is don't make sex perfect. Sex is not perfect. If any of you here have had the chance to have sex, you know, I never know. No, nobody's perfect, and when you get 2 imperfect or more imperfect people in a room together, it increases the chances of something going wrong. And a lot can go wrong. Sex is noisy, it's messy, it's weird. A lot of times it happens in the dark. So there is a lot that can go wrong. But that's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. You should include stuff going wrong in some of your sex scenes. It's okay to include someone getting off early, or false starts, missing, finding the wrong place to go. It can happen. It does happen. Oops. Feel free to include that. That'll add extra depth to your scenes and help force character development, reveal certain things. Maybe your characters will discover they like something they didn't know they liked, or don't like something that they never even thought of before. It's not mean, it's mean. It's not neat, it's not clean, it can be silly, it can be messy, it can be hilarious. Sometimes gases get worked up. It happens, so take that into consideration. Nothing has to be perfect. Things can go wrong. Sometimes you get cramps. Sometimes you get cramps. Sometimes somebody gets a little overheated, a little overexhausted, a little dehydrated. It happens. We're only human. We can only do so much so fast. So, yeah, don't make your sex perfect. Make it imperfect. Make people screw up. Make a mess. Have fun with it. But while you're having fun of it, keep in mind your lubrication. What was that? Water is not lubricant. I recently found a list online of over 200 items used as lubricant in online fan fiction. Yes, it was from WTF fan fiction, and over 200. It was over 200. Gravel.
And melted sugar.
Yep, melted sugar. Yep. Melted. People use this. People have written this. I do not recommend it.
And stay away from the hot sauce.
Yeah, stay away from the hot sauce. Stay away from
Anything that's not actual.
basically, if it
Olive oil works though.
olive oil can work. Olive oil can be expensive though. I don't know if you want to use your good olive oil on that. But yeah, it was a huge list with a lot of very inappropriate items, and many of them I'm not going to list here because they were incredibly disturbing.
Yeah, please don't repeat them.
I'm not going to repeat them. If you want to find them, it was on WTF Fanfiction, WT Fanfiction. It was over 200 items, and it also included a small list of things people had used as condoms that are not condoms. Just use condoms. Store brand, store-bought condoms. Nothing else. There are some alternatives in a pinch for lubricant. One item on the list was spit. Spit's not really a good choice. It dries really fast. You ever, get your finger wet, hold it up, check the wind? You know how fast that dries? It's a matter of seconds. It's not going to make it down there. By the time anything gets down there, it's going to be dry again, so you just basically wasted your time. Going in dry, of course, is an option, but unless your character is on the receiving end and has had a lot of practice with that, it's going to hurt. So don't. And you, I know, are the biggest hater of that, since all of the fan fiction you read, that includes it.
Oh, yes.
Don't have your characters go in dry. Just don't. Unless you're going for some kind of masochistic twist on the story, don't go in dry. Typically, use lubricant in a pinch. Petroleum jelly, Vaseline can work. Anything with a kind of a neutral pH that won't dry really quickly will work. And it's saying here, if it stings on a cut, it'll sting in your butt. So just keep that in mind if you're looking for impromptu lubrication for your characters. Just think about that. Mostly just try to stick to the store brands, KY, I don't know, any other kinds, whatever you like, whatever your characters like.
Flavored cake.
Yeah, flavored if you want. It's all good. Glow in the dark if they have it. Scented, sparkles. I don't know, as long as it's lubrication. Yes?
I actually saw something online about how KY jelly is actually not good to use because it has sugar as an ingredient or something, which is weird, like glucose or something. So I don't know. I read a thing about how that's not good to use. So.
I did read one once about, actually, I think it was a condom. Icy hot style. It was supposed to be hot cold, and it was causing burning. So be careful with those. Try to stick to the neutral stuff. My third tip for the don'ts is don't make it up. Don't write about a type of sex, a fetish, a kink that you know nothing about or only have assumptions about. Like I said before, do your research. If you don't want to do research in other people's erotica, go online and look up the real thing.
There are many free porn places.
There are many free porn places on the internet, and I won't ask any of you to repeat your history searches here. But do your research. If you know people and are comfortable asking them about it, ask real people who have experienced things that you haven't experienced. Get a first-hand perspective of how things work, how things don't work. Pick up a how-to for dummies guidebook. They're for everything. You can find one for every kind of fetish if you look hard enough, even if it's an off-brand style.
Oh, trust me, you can walk into Barnes & Noble and find
Oh yeah, you can walk in to Barnes & Noble.
Can you buy it? That's the question. Do you have a guess?
Well, yeah, you can get a friend to buy it for you. Do what you have to do, but do your research. You don't want to get it wrong, because if you write a kink in your novel, the person who's going to read that novel is going to be interested in that kink and may partake. And if they know you made something up and got it wrong, they're not going to be interested in your story. They're going to be like, that's not how it works. Why am I reading this? This person has no idea what they're talking about. Right. It has to make sense. It has to work with how it really works. And if you don't know how it works because you haven't or don't want to partake of a certain fetish, which there's nothing wrong with that, you should research it. Go online, talk to people, find your literature in books. Whatever you have to do, get first real hand experience on how to do it first, just so as any readers who do partake can enjoy the sex you're trying to write without going, but wait a minute, that's not right. That doesn't work that way.
And logic are key.
Yes. But on that note, don't necessarily use porn as your reference.
Why ever not?
Typical big name porn from the big production companies is fake. They fake it.
I wonder why.
My life is a lie.
Yes, everybody's life is a lie. Your porn is faked.
Amateur
These,
porn, on the other
amateur porn is fine, but the big name pornos, those are film productions, just like any other movie. They have takes, they have lighting, they have multiple films, multiple shootings. So what the characters are doing on scene isn't real because it's cut. They take from different perspectives, they have people stop, change angles, change light bulbs. It's not continuous sex. So you can't guarantee that the people on screen are really doing anything they're enjoying. They're just acting. And they're acting to get their money, they're acting to get the scene out. They're actors, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not necessarily good reference material for realistic sex scenes in your novel. If you are looking for realistic sex scenes, go for the amateur stuff. Anything that someone filmed in their home with a handy cam or a cell phone, because there's no production there. There's basically just hit record and having fun. That's real. It's real sex, and that is, if it's something that you don't want to do yourself, you can use other people doing it as a reference. And I also feel that I should point out, given where we are, hentai is a bad reference.
Are
You
you
mean
sure?
tentacles aren't great?
I'm sure they're fantastic, but where are you going to find them? Well, real ones. Yeah, you can make them. Baddragon.com has some wonderful toys, if any of you have ever been there. But
You are not adding that to the wish list.
But chances are you're not going to find an actual tentacle monster from hell or space hell or wherever they're from ready to show you what it's like to have real tentacle monsters have their way with you. Was that something?
I use hell space in my novels, thank you very much.
And now you know where they're from. So yeah, don't use like any production hentai. It's a cartoon. It's not going to be real. They over-exaggerate it on purpose to make it more erotic and to sell more volumes, and that's fine for porn. If you want to write porn, go for it. Over-exaggerate it. That's what you want to do. But if you're going for realistic, normal people, stay away from it. Look for amateurs. Look for real-world experience. Then you'll get good reference for your sex scenes. All right, this is going to be an interesting one. This is about shock value. Don't include things like incest, bestiality, or anything really extreme like that just for shock value. It's good advice in general, don't include anything just for shock value, but for something like this, it can be a real turnoff for people if you include something like incest or bestiality or other things like that. And if you're doing it with no plot point, if you just want to shock your readers and you include it in there, there's a good chance people are just going to close your book and never open it again.
Quit looking at me.
No, you're the opposite. You find what you're looking for, you will find the sequel. You did that earlier today.
Okay.
And just to cut in, who's aware of the concept of trigger warnings? This is a good reason why.
Yes. You never know if someone's going to have a trigger, so you don't want to include it without some kind of forewarning, or if it's made known that your novel in advance is going to have this. If you're going to include non-consensual, make it known in advance somewhere that that's going to be in there, or set up the scene to make it show that it's going to go there so readers have a chance to not read that part, because you don't want to trigger something. That is the taboo of taboo. Don't trigger anybody's.
That's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Yeah, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Don't keep in mind your trigger warnings. But mostly, the best bet is if you set up that someone is going to do or is into any of these extremes, then you've set up the warning in your story that this might happen. So if you start writing the sex scene that includes it, your readers will know, hey, wait a minute, this is something I don't want to read, and then they can either skip it or stop reading it without forcing it in their faces, activating a trigger warning, turning them off, hitting them hard, anything like that. You don't want to include anything that might do that just to shock them. That is just, it's not cool. Don't do that to people. Yes. Make sure you set up and make sure it fits with your story. Make sure, for whatever reason, it fits. Like in Silence of the Lambs. And you got a guy cutting off people's skin and wearing it. But that's set up. You know that's happening before you see it happen. You never actually see it happen, but you know it's coming. You want to keep something like that in mind for your story. You don't just want to suddenly jump to someone doing something that most people wouldn't want to read, especially if it's illegal. That's a good keep in mind. If it's generally considered to be illegal, really think about whether you need to include it or not. Another important one, and I kind of touched on this before, don't write a sex scene into your novel just to have a sex scene. I believe you want every scene in your novel to add to your plot in some way. Either it has plot development or character development or a reveal related to that. That adds to your story in a whole. Your sex scene should do the same. It should add something to your overall story. If you're just writing the sex just for sex, you might as well just be writing porn, which never has a plot anyway. And if you want to just write porn, that's fine. I write it sometimes too. It's fun just to get a short little thing out there. But if you want to add sex to your overall novel, make sure you find a way to make it add something. Include some kind of development. Have a character try out something new and discover something new about themselves. Have two characters kind of, maybe they're a little tipsy, they do it for the first time together and they realize, hey, maybe there's something between us, and then you can start a relationship. Maybe things can go wrong and you can end a relationship if it's really bad sex. Anything like that, just make sure you add something to your overall story. Make it mean something. That way you can give your readers something interesting, something kinky, but it wasn't for nothing in the long run. That'll also help keep the importance of the scene in their minds. They're more likely to remember it later on. It's like, oh yeah, the character said such and such about themselves right after having sex with so-and-so. It basically just adds more to your scene, to your story overall. Definitely touched on this one earlier, but I want to get into more detail on the limitations of anatomy. Because it's very important for realism, and it's broken a lot. We already talked about that there's only so far a person can go physically, how much they can hold, how long they can last, how far they can bend, move, twist themselves around. Some people can fold themselves up in a pretzel, and other people can barely touch their toes. I can't touch my toes. Can you touch your toes?
I can touch other people's toes. Does that count?
Uh-oh. Oh dear. Whose toes are we touching now? Uh-oh.
Come on, boss man. Thank you.
So when you're keeping in mind anatomy, if you have a character that's known to be incredibly flexible, go ahead, have him or her tuck their feet behind their shoulders. It fits in with them, but if they've established as being average, they might be lucky if they can get their heels to their ears, never mind tuck their feet behind their head. But yeah, if you establish that someone is particularly bendy, maybe double jointed, though I hear that's not a literal thing, then you can have them use that flexibility during the sex scenes to add to it and add to the imagery. Another thing is physical strength, stamina. Like I said, people can only hold other people up so far. If any of you have flipped through the Kama Sutra or anything similar, I don't know if anyone's flipped through that before. Anyone here? A couple people? I get some head nods here. You may have noticed some rather interesting positions. I've seen ones where the bottom was holding themselves up from a bar suspended in the air while the other person was doing them. Unless you have some really good upper body strength, I know I couldn't do that. I couldn't hold myself up during that. I'm a bit distracted at the time. So holding myself up, I wouldn't want to. It's a bit of a distraction. But if you have a character that is strong with the upper body strength, you then want to try it out, go for it. No, we're not doing it. No. But if they're not so strong, just better not to do it, or to do it and have it go wrong.
Can there at least be pillows?
The smart thing to do would be include pillows, but not necessarily everyone thinks that far ahead. Depends on how confident they are.
What if you're in the bathroom?
A lot can go wrong in the bathroom. Yeah, be careful of your shower sex things. Things are already slippery as it is. Again, stamina. People have their physical limits. They can only go so far. I've read things that imply that people go straight all night long. No. 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 No.
How about the multiple back to back to back to back?
Yeah, multiple back to back. Men typically can't do that. So,
5 minutes.
yeah. Any guy here can tell you, you can't go back to back to back to back to back to back to back. You need a recharge time. We need a cool down time. And eventually we're going to run out of juice, literally and figuratively. There is a limit to both of those things. So keep that in mind. Make sure to include those limitations. Don't write your characters going complete night from like midnight to 6 a.m. Yes?
Yeah, I think one of the terms, one of the best authors that ever wrote sex science,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Bond. Sometimes you go deep into it, other times it's in the wills.
Mm-hmm.
Bond always had stamina.
Yeah.
Just do hour-long sessions and go out and kill somebody.
Yeah. Well, Bond is a super spy. He probably had training in it. That's the kind of training I wouldn't mind, that's for sure. But yeah, people get hungry, people get thirsty, people have to go to the bathroom. So if you want to imply like all-night sessions, it would be better to say that they... Really? We're almost there. To include breaks in between. They go at it and then they take 10, 15 minutes and then they go at it again. And they're probably not going to go all night. Eventually you're just going to go to sleep. The 8th point I have is to don't ignore the consequences of sex. As I said before, all your scenes should have a plot-relevant meaning. There are consequences to sex just based off of that. Number one, of course, being pregnancy. A man and woman have sex, and it's unprotected. There's a good chance she could get pregnant. That's something to keep in mind if you're going for realistic sex. If you've established that the female isn't on any kind of birth control, and that the male didn't use any kind of protection, you might want to include at least a mention. Hey, wait a minute. I might get pregnant, or hey, you might get pregnant. It's realistically something that could happen. If you don't want to cover that, just imply that either they used a condom or she's on birth control. Another thing that's good for all genders is STDs.
I wouldn't say those are good.
They're not good, they're bad. Nobody wants them. But they're out there, and if you've established that the characters know each other, they're generally kind of clean, you can probably just kind of ignore mentioning it. But if you have a character that gets around a lot, does a lot of one-night stands, things like that, including the possibility, even just mentioning, having friends mention, do you know what you can pick up from doing that? Helps to add that level of threat and perhaps excitement to the sex under the thought of, hey, you might pick up a sexually transmitted disease, you might get crabs or something. And those are just a couple of the examples. There's also emotional level examples as well. Some people treat sex as nothing. Some people are like, well, if I'm having sex with you, now we're dating and we're going to get married or whatever. Some people hold off sex until marriage, and if they accidentally screw up before they're married, that's a big thing to them. So those are just some of the consequences to keep in mind. The last one was the one you insisted I include.
I had to have something to contribute.
Avoid cliches. You might be wondering, sex cliches. I see you looking, sex cliches. The big one would be stopping a cult from sacrificing a virgin by having sex with her. Mm-hmm. If anyone's seen Bordello of Blood, It's a low-level cliche, but it's something. It's not very heroic for your hero to save the day just from having sex with the heroine. Just by. It's the easy way around, I suppose. And it's also not accurate because typically in virgin sacrifices, virgin blood is actually blood that's never been used in a sacrifice before, not the blood of an actual virgin. So if you're going for realism, take that spin for it. Let's see, some of the other things. Oh, the hero having sex with the leading lady right before saving the day. Typical action movie cliche. Even most action movies don't do that anymore. Not since the early 90s, I think they stopped doing that. They even mentioned it in Speed. Relationships based off extreme situations don't work. And it didn't work for Sandra Bullock and, what's his name? Keanu Reeves.
Speed 2 is proof of that.
Yes, Speed 2 proved that. Plenty of other ones prove that. Also, like a lot of movies mentioned, don't get married the day you meet the guy. One of my favorite movies that mentioned that was Enchanted, actually. It's like, you just met the guy, you don't know anything about him, you're going to marry him? Well, yes, it's true love. No, it doesn't work that way. There may be love at first sight, but date for a while first.
Don't wait for Prince Charming, go to him.
Yes, go find, have your heroine find Prince Charming. Be different about it. But yeah, you want to avoid cliches because people will see them for what they are. They'll see a cliche and they'll go, oh, that old story again. And then it kind of loses the depth and the immersion when they see in advance where you're going with your plot. And the cliche is just a big, this is what I'm writing, this is where I'm going, and this is obviously how it's ending. Unless you can put in a good twist to that at the end, just try to avoid the cliches all in.
Another common word for cliche too is a trope.
Yeah, avoid tropes. And those are the 9 don'ts. What's the time on it? 5 minutes, all right. So we have a little bit of extra time. Does anybody have any questions? Maybe? Or was I that good that I answered all your questions already? Yes?
Have you read 50 Shades of Grey?
I have not.
I haven't read it. I just did little excerpts and I just didn't know how to know the number.
Yeah.
I played the 50 Shades of Grey
They
video
said
game.
that
That's how I read it.
the hero having sex at the end is a cliche, right?
Right before the big climactic scene.
Right before the big climax.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So does he have to have sex at the end or somewhere else?
That's a great reward for saving the day.
Yeah, put it at the end, save the day, and then
Yeah, I
have the
think
sex.
at the end he should.
Tell that to Link and Zelda.
I can picture it.
Yeah, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. Maybe he saves the day and she's like, well, thank you. That's about it. Have a pie. Yes?
That's Peach and Mario.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
What do you think about erotica.com website? Have you ever been there before?
I've not been there before. I'm not familiar with that site.
It's a site where regular Joes and Janes can go and basically publish on the internet. There are different genres, there's science fiction, fantasy.
If it's a place for regular Joes to post their stories, I'm all for it in general. Just because anything to help writers get their stories out there in public, I support automatically.
What site is it?
It's called erotica.com.
That's erotica.com for anyone who can hear.
11:56. Well, we're making perfect timing, don't we agree? Well, but then again, you said nothing should be perfect.
Nothing should be perfect.
Well, unless you're talking about my darling daughter.
Well, of course.
Talking about timing.
Too soon.
I said we're making. Okay, I meant good time. I meant we're making good timing. Sorry.
No, I understand what you meant. But yeah, that's pretty much.
One over there.
Yep.
What do you think of the concept of ending a story with sex? I've read a lot of them, and they all, like, most of them seem to end with a sex scene and then ending in a state of the story. What do you think of that as a concept, or?
If you set it up that is the conclusion of the story that you're going for, that you want person A and person B to eventually get together and have sex, then that would basically be the climax of your story. And as long as the rest of your story sets up towards that direction, it's okay. But if it kind of comes from out of nowhere, then it could be considered kind of cliche. and you might want to avoid it if it's not really necessary or fits in with the rest of your plot.
Either that, or I think that's not really the true ending, and it would be
Yeah.
worth doing a revision to extend it a little bit.
Yeah, maybe them having sex and then being like, oh, what the hell did I do last night? Oops. I did what with who? What did I drink that night?
How does this happily ever after work again?
What's happily ever after?
Oh.
I'll live for content. Is there any other questions? Yes?
What was that website you mentioned earlier, WTF?
WT fanfiction. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great source for any kind of,
Sure is.
it's basically a lot of weird things that people put in fan fiction that it's like,
Honestly, it's on Tumblr where 90% of the population needs the website.
yeah, yeah. There are a lot of people who write their fan fiction on Tumblr and don't research. Any other questions? No? All good? Cool. Well, I want to thank you all for attending my panel and the premiere, first run of this panel.
I may not have gotten to attend all of it, but I got to attend part of it.
Well, it's better than none of it.
The other part I saw was hentai worth watching.
Was it worth watching?
Sure was.
Well, there you go. Just don't use it for research. All right, if you... Oh, no problem. I want to thank you all for being a great audience to me for my first time hosting a panel ever.